Hello, and I don't know if everyone can hear me, so hopefully I can have some waves in the air because I can see the audience. So if you can hear me, oh, brilliant! Thank you so much. And so thank you so much for having me today. I'm joining you from an equally volatile weather system here in Newcastle. And yep, so thank you, Amy, for that introduction. So as you said, I've worked for the movement for 12 years, 15 years now, sorry. I was in a regional trust just like Surrey in Shropshire, and then joined the central team back in 2021. What I'm going to talk to you today about is our journey as a wildlife trust as a whole on our community organising journey. And if you're not familiar with the term community organising, I will go through what that is as well. I'm going to talk about power in communities and what does that look like. And I'm going to give you some examples of when it works, it really works, and share some really fantastic case studies of both international examples of inspiring community organising projects, as well as ones within our own family here at the Wildlife Trust. So the Wildlife Trust itself, as Amy just said a second ago, we are a federation of 47 wildlife trusts, and they're all individual charities within their own right. And when the Wildlife Trust was founded by this lovely guy here with some very impressive shorts on, this is Charles Rothschild. And he founded the Wildlife Trust movement over 100 years ago. And at that time, they were on this mission to stop the change in destructive practices around agriculture, and what he saw was the natural habitat being completely decimated. And he was compelled with many other friends to help protect precious landscapes and seas. He helped in the initiation of protected spaces for wildlife, so wildlife like nature reserves, national parks, and areas of outstanding national beauty. And he was passionate and driven, along with a load of other pioneers in this area. And the Wildlife Trusts have always been rooted in wanting to inspire people to discover and connect with nature. But as we've stayed true to our mission, the world has changed, and actually people live their ways in different lives and interact with nature in very different ways. And I think the Wildlife Trust have seen ourselves as a movement that is kind of out there when it comes to engaging with different communities, but often it's been at a distance, and often it's been within our own echo chamber of people that look like us, sound like us, and want to act like us for nature. And I think we've started to really recognise that and kind of hold our hands up a little bit. So in recent years, we have had a goal to put people at the heart of nature's recovery. But in order to actually do that and actually achieve that, we have to mean all people. People have different life experiences that shape how they connect with the world around them. And I think the Wildlife Trusts have not always really understood those different perspectives. This is now changing, I can safely say. And that is largely part to our commitment to moving to a community organising approach. And we call that Team Wilder. So you may see that term used, but Team Wilder and community organising, same thing. So what on earth is community organising? Well, it's about empowering and building community, building power in communities in a way that actually hears people. And when we began our community organising journey, we had to do some reflecting, like I said, about how we engage with communities. And it's fair to say that the Wildlife Trust can be guilty of being a bit like that scene in, if anyone's a fan of Absolutely Fabulous or Ab Fab, where Jennifer Saunders' character waltzes into the office saying, "Don't panic, I'm here," helicoptering in. We've always kind of acted like we know what to do, we know best, don't worry about it. And sometimes that can be a bit off-putting to communities. We've tended to think, right, I'm going to work in this community, I'm going to put on 600 events and I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to run around chasing tails, and boom, we're all exhausted and we're not actually achieving what we wanted to. When we actually allow space for people, we want to focus more on upskilling others, and this is where there's that power shift in communities and where it comes from. Instead of trying to do everything all of the time, what we want to try and do is actually listen to people, go to where people are, and work with people. Ultimately, we're now moving into a community organising space that allows us to support communities, to lead them, and help them with the change, not us doing it for everybody, but actually giving people the skills, supporting them based on their own values, and actually allowing them to be empowered for themselves. And that's where we really will see change and people being put at the heart of nature's recovery. So what does power in communities actually look like? Well, when I was training in community organising, I was always uncomfortable with the term power. At first, I still felt like it had that negative connotation. But actually, it's because I was always hearing phrases like, we need to give power to communities. And that still felt like an assumption that we held the power. So actually, wording, I discovered, is everything. And actually, what we are doing through our organising approach is we're supporting the building of power in communities. And by the way, when I'm talking about organisations like ourselves, like the Wildlife Trust, who can help build power, everything that I'll talk to you about today can be done by a single person in a community with their community. This isn't exclusive to a large movement or ENGO. This is techniques that can be done by and are done by individuals who just want to make a stance. If you're online today, you're sitting in the audience going, I want to make a change in where I live, you can absolutely do all of this and apply all of this. So the first thing that happens in community organising is really simple. By the way, this stuff isn't really majorly sophisticated. It's actually, a lot of it is human nature, and a lot of things that we've forgotten over time. And I think the pandemic has helped open our eyes to the sense of that lost community spirit that so many places have had. So reaching into your community is really important, and actually understanding and mapping out the opportunities that are there in front of you. I affectionately call it the power of tea and cake. That's a very British thing, isn't it? But for me, setting up meetings with tea and cake has been one of the most successful things I ever seem to have done in allowing people to come and have a chat. And it's amazing what a Victoria sponge can do to get people to chat about where they live and what they love about where they live. So and I've tried to encourage my colleagues across the movement to really use biscuits and cake. And funnily enough, they've all said, yeah, it works really well. I won't lie, it can be really daunting. So when you're starting from scratch, especially with communities you've maybe not moved in before, and it is that physical thing of going to a space. We use door knocking a lot, which a lot of people are like, no way, absolutely, because you don't want to disturb people, because we associate door knocking with being tried to be sold a Hoover. So I get that, but actually it's been one of the best things that a lot of, again, my colleagues have been able to do, because you're just going to have a conversation to allow people to talk about themselves, which always works. There's also holding public meetings, maybe contacting a local school or other local community hubs that are out there, contacting faith groups, again, pillars of communities, speaking to local councillors or other community groups that may look or sound like you. It can be an overwhelming experience, but what I have fundamentally learned is that community mapping is a bit like pulling a thread. And once you start pulling, things start to unravel in front of you. I have worried about people being rude to me. I've worried about not being welcomed or accepted, when actually, in my experience over the last sort of 12 years of doing this sort of thing, whenever I have gone to do this and reached into a community and spoken to people and asked them to tell me about their experiences and the place they live in, you can't shut people up. They just will not stop talking. And I love that, because we just generate this really authentic conversation. And that's not one that's driven by wildlife. Yes, I have worked for the Wildlife Trust. Yes, we do have goals and aspirations, but actually learning about people, it's amazing. Somebody once just talked to me for half an hour about how much they loved having hedgehogs come into their garden. And that conversation led to some really fantastic community work. People are warm and open and actually really proud. And I've found amazing contacts through having conversations. Keen, passionate people will always tell their story. And organisations made of incredible volunteers would love the chance to work together. So sometimes you are a facilitator in joining other passionate people together. Community mapping is that listening that often is a vital first step. And I think a lot of projects in the past that wildlife trusts have run have really not done that development time of going into a community and listening to them. So community mapping is one of the fundamental things to do. The other fundamental thing, and what we're talking about today a lot, is power mapping. Again, sounds really daunting, but is essential for success. Power mapping, just like community mapping, is that research phase, the mad Googling phase, I call it. Who is holding the power? You've got to know the dynamics of a community so you know how to shift it, how to start conversations, and ultimately how to build it. Power can exist in those obvious examples. So when we first sort of hear this wording, we think government, our boss, police, but it can be more hyper-local than that. Various cultural dynamics can occur. Class assumptions are a big thing. Believe it or not, Love Island contestants hold power of influence in our communities. That was a shock for me to discover. Celebrities and people like that. But to give you an example that's a little bit more relatable from my own experiences, I worked on an urban river project once with a very close-knit community who were desperately trying to work out a flooding issue in their area. Local people felt really powerless against a board of town council members who seemed to want to be the gatekeeper of all solutions, and they didn't want to listen to the community. They knew best. Through conversations in the area, though, I found a volunteer who used to sit on the board, and he was really well respected both in the community and still with the current community board members. And he acted very much as sort of an ally. And through him, I could start to really research the board members, not in a weird, creepy way, you know, but just understand a little bit more about their backgrounds and what they were motivated by and what they held dear to them. That gave me the ability to set an action plan. And what I found out was it was clear that the board members were giving off an assumption that they held power, but not in an authoritative sense. They didn't actually have any power to say no to a lot of the things that the community were bringing forward as solutions for flooding. It was actually about the information they withheld from from the community that they were being passed from local government. They were just thinking, right, well, I don't need to tell you about local consultations of things that are happening, because they wanted to go to them. They wanted to be the gatekeepers, like I said. But the volunteer that I found was able to use his power of influence for good, and he started to break down some of the communication barriers, and I went about on my own mission whilst he was doing that, in informing the community, upskilling them, helping them with writing letters, helping them to understand where they could go and speak to like the local like the water companies, for example. From there, we kind of launched a bit of a, I'm not going to say guerrilla movement, but almost like, we are going to come to these council meetings. And they were a bit shocked to see members of the public there, because actually you are allowed to go to them if you want to. It got to a point where actually they said, all right, let's have a meeting and let's have some sort of mediation here. And the outcome was that the relationships actually really improved. Better dialogue could be had with that local community. And as a result, some of those members of those communities then got elected to the board, and that made sure that in legacy for this, it didn't happen again. And they were able to make those improvements to flooding that were damaging their homes. So that's sort of a local one for you. But another example that's really sort of framed a lot of the things I do in my career is a fantastic example that demonstrates power mapping in a community. And this is a lady called Bryony Carter. And if you've never seen her TED Talk, I implore you to watch it. So it's called Greening the Ghetto. And I remember watching this about 10 years ago. And it was a real game changer for me and my understanding of community organising and engaging with communities to lead for change. I'm not going to go into loads of detail because I want you to really watch it. However, Majora was a resident of one of the most deprived areas of the South Bronx in New York. And she managed to fight government, water companies and waste companies and politicians who were hell-bent in basically putting every single disposal and waste disposal site on her local area. She was part of a community and she grew up in this community that had an average life expectancy of 65, high levels of unemployment, high percentage of incarceration and crime, and all the other ingredients that you would expect for a doomed community. It was literally treated as a dumping ground for sewage waste, and she could just see areas just going to waste and really wanted to make that change. So how did she do that? Through community mapping and power mapping. Well, the main thing is she was motivated by love and pride for her community, and that is massive. If you have real love and pride for where you come from, I know I certainly do, it makes you want to make that change. the first drive for her was she knew she wasn't able to do this alone, but she also knew that there was an incredible amount of pride in the community she came from and where she lived. So, as I said before, she researched, and I know it doesn't seem like the sexiest part, but it definitely is the most important part. And she did her power analysis research, and she reached into her community and found people that were willing to support her, do the research for her. And the more she learned, the more she knew she could do more. And the saying power is knowledge is true. She was able to speak to local journalists. She knew how to draw their support through the community. She was able to find other activists who had done similar things in some other parts of the city, and she helped to sort of start raise the profile of their plight. What she did in finding her army, as she calls it, is although it was really time consuming and took up the first part of the first year of her trying to do it, was she was able to find people who wanted to support her. She found people who had skills to share, who were able to go to meetings, to rally, you know, everything like that. And it always makes me think of, whenever I watch this TED talk that she did, it made me think of that film Erin Brockovich, which we all know. And that film is based on a true story. Erin Brockovich was a real woman. And the main theme of that film, if you've not seen it, and hopefully most of you would have, was the heroine in this story was a non-academic single mom taking on a multi-billion-pound company called PG&E, who were poisoning local people. And she was able to, you know, the story, I don't want to ruin it, but hopefully plot spoiler, but she won because the main part of the film is you see her going around speaking to local people and treating them like people and hearing their stories. And that, I think, for me, will always be the fundamental thing here, is she treated people like people, and Marjorie was the same. She treated people like people, and that meant people wanted to come and support, you know, the change in this community. The thing she did to build legacy was to create local gardeners, create youth groups, landscapers. She found people who were willing to support her in training and upskilling the local community. She created this amazing toolkit for the landscape around her. And although it felt like those skills weren't there initially, what she did find is that people were more than passionate to learn those skills. And then people wanted to help as well. She had people coming from all across America to talk about the different growing skills that the local people could do to create food. And from that, a whole community then became growers and created green space in these places that were going to be basically condemned for waste disposal. But what about us here in the UK? So, as I said, we're moving to this community organising space and way of working at the Wildlife Trust, and we've been doing stuff that, you know, a certain way for a really long time, so we're having to culturally unpick this for ourselves, and that can take time, and also it does take money, unfortunately. About 2021, I think community organising wasn't a term that we would use within our movement. We certainly didn't have people trained up in it unless they'd maybe come through it based on their own experiences, like myself. So we were really lucky that as part of this transition, we were awarded £5 million from the National Lottery Charity Fund at the Wildlife Trust, and we were able to distribute this across all of our wildlife trusts. And it is Nextdoor Nature was born. And really what Nextdoor Nature is, it's about being able to implement community organising in disconnected communities from nature, and where we're able to have the most impact and also learn what that impact means for us. And I just want to share a couple of stories. There are so many, and I could talk for hours and hours and hours about the incredible work that's being done by colleagues across the movement, but some of them that stand out. Now, you'll see there Isles of Scilly, right? The Isles of Scilly Wildlife Trust, tiny little trust of about 5 people on the island. And those of you that may know the Isles of Scilly probably are thinking that it couldn't be as far removed from the example of the South Bronx in New York. You know, it even has one of its islands is called Millionaire Island. So why on earth are we talking about deprived populations? Well, it does have a native population of people there that do suffer from the influx of second home buying, you know, things that are also mirrored in Cornwall. And actually they've really struggled to engage and connect with their green space, and actually the trust itself. They also have a large migrant population on the island, and the biggest industry on the island is flower picking. And they have a huge influx of seasonal workers who come and live on the island and then struggle to integrate, and it causes tensions, as you can imagine, and lots of problems. But what I love about what the Isles of Scilly have done is they have worked with the flower picking company there, and also a laundrette company. You're thinking, okay, where's she going with this? But the migrant workers, they can't integrate with the community because they work 6 days a week, and their only day off is spent washing all of the clothes that get really dirty through the week. So by partnering with the laundrette company, they were able to have tokens to have all of their clothing washed, so they didn't have to spend hours and hours and hours washing and drying their clothes. It meant it gave their Sundays free, and they set up a cultural exchange through music and beer at the local pub, which I loved seeing that coming through on the report, where people were learning different languages. They were bringing different meals to it. But what combined was that the locals then took the migrant workers out to explore the islands, and they started doing beach cleans and litter picking, and setting up little mini projects amongst themselves, but ultimately making friends. And it has improved the relationships of lots of local people on the island, as well as the migrant population that are there as well. And that's carrying on as we go. And we're hoping to make a film about it in the next couple of months. But it's just such a heartwarming story to come from the island. And then a bit more closer home to me is Durham Wildlife Trust. Durham Wildlife Trust weren't doing any community organising before Nextdoor Nature came along, and what they've been doing is the exceptional my exceptional colleague Tom at Durham Wildlife Trust has been going out and working with organisations like Back on the Map, who have had, historically, we would never have worked with an organisation like Back on the Map, which are a social enterprise solely tasked with improving the local area and job opportunities and housing standards in Durham. Sorry, not Durham, Hendon in Durham, County Durham. And the two would never have worked together, but he did exactly what I've been talking about today. He went in and he just started chatting to everybody. Thankfully, he's really good chatterbox, and he was really warm, and he's from the area, so he's got the accent, and he understood people, and he made some fantastic connections. And one of them was with Back on the Map, and also the mine charity, the local mine charity there. He was able to work with them to get further funding so they could set up a community garden, community planters along the high street, and the list goes on and on and on, so much so that he's empowered local groups to go after their own funding so they can do their own allotments and their own parks and set up their own walking for health groups. And he's also created an army of volunteers with Back on the Map's chief exec, Joanne Cooper, who's just been blown away by the relationship that they've created. And for me, that was just so great to see, and that's communities doing things for themselves with support of organisations like the Wildlife Trust. That's what it should be about. We should be just there as a helping hand should they need it. And then the final one was Yorkshire Wildlife Trust Welcome to England programme. This was working with mostly refugees and asylum seekers to learn English and make new friends and find out about living in Hull. Again, not historically some people we would work with, but through community participation and the work of my colleague Andy at Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, he was able to share his knowledge of the local environment, take them out on visits to different green spaces. Within them, they had their own skills. Some of them had come from their countries. They were farmers, they were academics, they were students, they were doctors, and they were able to actually use their skills. And although asylum seekers aren't allowed to work in the area as such, they were able to give back, and that was the thing that they said they really wanted to do, was to give back to the community that have been able to give them safe haven. And it was just really great. They used their some of the farmers that had come were able to use their backgrounds to then set up allotments and again support their mental health needs as well. So it was just really, these are just a snippet of some stories that are coming through over and over and over again. We would never have been able to do that without this funding, and we're learning so many lessons as an organisation. To just wrap up really quickly then, to give you some pointers. The power of tea and cake, as I said, food and music and it's just really for me that one of the biggest binds for anybody coming together. Finding out what you have in common with people in your community, talking to people and understanding their experiences and actually listening is one of the biggest and most powerful things you can do. Understanding who has the power by doing some power analysis and not being scared to take on that power by building it within communities, finding allies who are going to support you, and also being honest about the barriers and how you break them down. And that is the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bryony.
No problem.
Thank you. That was incredibly interesting. Does anyone in the room have any questions to begin with? Does anyone have any questions for Bryony about her talk? I can bring the mic over. I think we do have one online. Should we start with that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so what is the Wildlife Trust's experience of borough and county councils in taking their responsibilities under biodiversity and environmental legislation seriously, e.g. highway authorities?
Say that again. That's a big question.
Oh yeah, okay.
I'm going to write it down so I can see it.
Yeah, perfect. What is the Wildlife Trust's experience of borough and county councils in taking their responsibilities under biodiversity and environmental legislation seriously, e.g. highway authorities?
So what I think the person is asking is that how are we holding them to account, local boroughs and local councils, how are we holding them account on their biodiversity agreements?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, well, this isn't my like expertise, but I'm going to go on my knowledge based on this. So we have obviously we are a federation, so each wildlife trust has their own local policy team or people that will work very closely with the local councils, but as an organisation centrally, we have a policy team who work closely with government. And the key thing at the moment is we've got an entire team that work specifically on like local nature recovery, which is the huge document that's just been produced now. So local nature recovery schemes we've been challenging constantly to push and make sure that councils are held up to make sure they deliver on these. And part of our role is going in and making sure that they are being delivered on time to schedule. So that's the one thing. So that's local nature recovery partnerships and plans. And then generally just being able to, so Sheffield and Rotherham, for example, were able to use community organising to get support in declaring a climate emergency with the local town council. And we know that there is lobbying that goes on. We have campaigning and mobilisers within each trust that we're always trying to support in fighting local issues, especially around like HS2, specifically projects around the River Wye and the pollution and things like that. So there's a whole load of stuff that goes on, and probably I'll think of a million other ones at about 11 o'clock tonight, but it is very much in our interest to push on government and fight government to hold them to account on what they're saying. We're very much also looking forward to the elections in 2024 and planning now on how we can have influence and support influence within communities to make sure that whoever comes in as our next government, if it stays as Tory or Labour, that we are making sure that we're standing up for policy.
Amazing, thank you so much. Does anyone else have any other questions in the room, online? Oh, okay, hands flying up. Shall I come to you first?
Can you say who founded the Wildlife Trust? I can hear it clearly.
Yeah, so it was a gentleman called Charles Rothschild, and he's part of a very, very wealthy, well-to-do family called the Rothschilds. But thankfully he had a lot of money to do a lot of good. So yeah, so it's Charles Rothschild.
Thanks.
No problem.
Thank you. How can I find out about initiatives in my local area to get involved in?
So each wildlife trust will have their own webpage. So I know Surrey, for example, have got some fantastic web pages. Is that right? That connect to the Nextdoor Nature. But if you go, we have a Nextdoor Nature web page. I can put that in, I can send details of that can be sent out, put it in the chat as well. We also we're releasing at the moment, it's just about to be launched, but we've got a Nextdoor Nature hub, which is a website which is a collection of loads and loads of learnings from community organising, from how to write a letter to your local MP, how to start your own campaign, how to apply for funding if you want to start your own community group up, and they've all been all together on this amazing hub with accessible videos and downloadable PDFs on how-to guides. That should be, I think it's being launched next week. I will double check on that, but that will be the Nextdoor Nature hub. From there, there's loads and loads of case studies on different areas, and you can find out about what's going on in your local area.
Okay, thank you so much, Bryony. And I'll just say on that as well, I'm Billy Pierce. I'm the community officer at Surrey Wildlife Trust. So I'm also working on the Nextdoor Nature project, which Bryony is leading from the central team, the Wildlife Trusts. So I'm actually working with different community groups across Guildford and Woking to help them kind of develop their own green spaces for nature through the community organising approach that Bryony was talking about earlier. So we have like a communities team at Surrey Wildlife Trust. We work with different community groups and organisations, much like the ones that are here today. So, you know, if you do want any information about communities or community groups within your area, local ones, then get in touch with us and, you know, we can help you out. And if you'd like my email address, then just ask me at the end of this and drop me an email. Okay, great. Are there any other questions? Any online? No. Okay. Well, I think we owe Bryony another round of applause. Thank you so much for that. That's been
no problem. My pleasure completely.
Thank you, Bryony. And just before you guys go, thank you all so much for coming and listening today. We've got about 25 minutes left of this event, so please just, you know, make the most of it. If you haven't got your face painted, go and get it painted now. Maybe go over to RHS, get yourself a planter, head upstairs if you haven't done so already. We've got some really cool stuff up there. And also, if you weren't able to attend our 2 other talks earlier today, we had a talk this morning, first thing, on action for insects, and at 1 o'clock we had a talk about finding your voice through like campaigning and activism. So I've got a QR code here. If you want to scan it, you can sign up by email journey. And through that email journey, you'll be sent reading lists from the different speakers, additional information, as well as the recordings of all 3 of these talks. So you can just watch them back in your own time. Okay, so if you'd like to come and scan this. And on top of that, we also have a competition, which is right over there. You can see what you can win. Okay, you're in with a very good chance. If you want to sign up through this QR code as well, all you literally have to do is put your name in and you can win this giant habitat, which is like 10 different habitats in one. It's worth around £150. So you may as well like toss your hat in the ring. Okay, but thank you so much for coming. It's been a brilliant day and enjoy your afternoons. Thanks.